Welcome back to Newstalk Lunchtime here on Newstalk. Shane Coleman standing in for Jonathan. Now, unless you were living on another planet for the last 24 hours, you would have realised that the Mahon Tribunal has been published. That tribunal was seriously critical, as everybody knows by now, of former Taoiseach Bertie Aherns. It basically found that considerable portions of his evidence were untrue. Stopped short of a finding of corruption against him, but the findings of untruth were damning enough to basically prompt Fianna Fáil to move to seek his expulsion from the party for conduct unbecoming. Micheal Martin has been talking about it at a press conference in Dublin in the last hour, and he joins me on the line now. Micheal, good afternoon. Welcome to Lunchtime.
Good afternoon, Shane.
It's been a bad couple of days for Fianna Fáil, to put it mildly.
I think it's been a bad day for Fianna Fáil. It's been a bad day for public life generally. I mean, let's remember the Mahon Tribunal was established to inquire into planning corruption, particularly in Dublin, and it has found that there was corruption in planning decisions in Dublin on behalf of former members of Fianna Fáil and a significant number of former members of Fine Gael and one Labour Party councillor. And I think that has debased planning and undermined public confidence in planning. And I think that's a very valuable service that the tribunal has played in terms of the political system and public life generally. So in addition to that, I think it found the actions of Padraig Flynn to be corrupt in accepting a payment from Tom Gilmartin, and also found the evidence of Bertie Aherns not to be truthful. So it's been very difficult, and I think overall bad for public life generally that these findings have been made. They deal obviously with issues that occurred in the late 80s and early 90s. It's fair to say that a lot has happened because of the tribunal since then in terms of improving public life, in terms of the regulatory framework that now governs the political contributions, declarations of interest, transparency in politics. We have a further journey to go, and I think it's up to the present generation of politicians to contribute to further enhancing public life and bringing back trust into politics.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Padraig Flynn, you mentioned Bertie Aherns. Add into that mix Charlie Haughey, who was strongly criticised by the Moriarty Tribunal, Ray Burke, who was found to be corrupt by the Flood Tribunal before the forerunner for the Mahon Tribunal, the same planning tribunal, and then throw in the criticism of Albert Reynolds yesterday in that tribunal report. That's 1/3 of the cabinet that was there in the early 1990s that the tribunals have made critical findings of. How can you rebuild trust in Fianna Fáil after that?
Well, first of all, I think you are correct, and I think that's very damaging to the party. But above all, it is an abuse of trust in the public, that the public have put into people, particularly people who have been found guilty of corruption. And I condemn that unreservedly. And without question, it has damaged trust in public life. I think how we can rebuild that, we've been elected, the current generation of TDs have been elected in the last general election. We have a mandate from over 400,000 people. We have an obligation to represent them. And I think our contribution has to be very resolute in terms of improving the conduct of public life, and by our actions we should be judged. And in that regard, we have put forward legislation to ban corporate donations, to establish a register for lobbyists, for example. Both were voted down. They were good bills. I accept that Phil Hogan's bringing forward legislation which doesn't ban corporate donations, but does have lower thresholds and lower amounts and so on, and declarations, which will improve it even further.
Okay.
But I reckon we should go further as part of the overall effort to rebuild trust in politics. But it's not just Fianna Fáil either now, Shane, and I think, I've just made the point this morning, we had the Moriarty Tribunal 12 months ago. That also reflected a culture where there was significant pattern of payments to politicians in the context of the most lucrative contract ever awarded by any government since the history of the state. And it says it was rushed, flawed, and the pattern of fundraising was designed to try and influence.
Okay, but let's just...
that's important too. And I said I have to deal with Fianna Fáil, and I have to make sure that in the future we deal with
I want to ask you in particular about, you're now moving to have Bertie Aherns expelled from the party, but when you were listening to Bertie Aherns' evidence in the Mahon Tribunal, those stories about the dig-outs, the whip around in Manchester, anyone who was there, anyone who studied that evidence did not believe that evidence stacked up. And there was a complete lack of documentary evidence. Did you believe Bertie Aherns when he was giving evidence at that time?
Well, of course, the first point is that it's towards the latter end of the tribunal, particularly 07 and 08, that his evidence began to emerge.
Just to clarify, Micheal, it was around the time of the general election campaign in 2007 when holes first started to emerge.
That's what I'm saying.
Bertie Aherns.
But in terms of his testimony, the actual his own evidence before the tribunal, and particularly if you remember the interview with Brian Dobson, I think was the first major. I think that may have arisen out of newspaper reports
in September 2006.
And I think at the time the Taoiseach was putting forward that his own personal difficulties was a factor in the chaos in his personal life, and I think people actually at that time believed that.
Okay. At what point did you think this doesn't add up?
The problem was that it was a mystery in terms of his personal finances. There was never any outward manifestation of any, ostentation or spending or anything like that. And the other key point, of course, is once one establishes a tribunal, you can't then yourself become judge and jury. That's the problem.
Yeah, but it's not a court of law. It isn't a court of law, and this is practical politics.
So the Oireachtas has to allow it conclude its work. You then can. Why set it up in the first place if you're going to become the judge and jury? That's the problem, and it was a problem.
Okay, but I suppose what I want to know is at what point. What I want to know, Micheal, is at what point did you say, do you know what? I don't think the dig-outs happened. I don't think the whip around in Manchester happened.
My problem with all of that is, the issue is that. A number of people gave evidence in relation to those dig-outs and so on. Now, the tribunal has really made a very strong finding in relation to that. They don't believe any of the accounts that were made. And when you see, quite a number of people going forward at that time, you're inclined to wait and see what the outcome is. I think the difficulty for people at that time was they didn't put all the strands together. And obviously, it took a high court, a tribunal with the powers of the High Court, and took them quite a long time to unravel all of this and to bring all the strands together to reach the conclusions that they've reached. I think it's unfair to suggest that any one individual outside of the tribunal who didn't have access to the entirety of the evidence or all of it could make the kind of judgments that the tribunal now has, having had access to all of the evidence material and have pulled all the strands together.
Okay, what about
I'm very disappointed, by the way. I genuinely didn't believe at the time that that there was that sums of money going through Bertie Aherns' accounts. In his total it's 165,000, and the difficulty for Bertie Aherns was that he was not in the position to truthfully account for that to the tribunal. That's the finding of the tribunal.
Okay,
I accept that.
What about this criticism from the tribunal aimed at members of the cabinet that you were a part of, basically accusing it of rushing to Bertie Aherns' defence and in the process trying to undermine the tribunal? Now, you were one of the ministers who came out and spoke about the tribunal, particularly I think in that time of December 2007 when Bertie Aherns was under significant pressure in the tribunal. You were one of the ministers who came out and spoke in his defence and questioned some of what the tribunal were doing.
Well, hold on a second. I don't think that's what the tribunal has said, and let's be very straight here, talked about undermining the integrity of its members and questioning its legality. At no stage did I ever question the legality of the tribunal, or did I ever undermine the integrity of its members. That's a very key point.
Okay.
And I think this is a commentary that's in the introduction to the tribunal. Obviously, there was no, the judges don't name people. They don't sort of make, there was no interviews with people or evidence attached to it. And I do take it very seriously because I would hate to think that the judge was under that viewpoint. I would point to a motion that was tabled in Dáil Éireann where confidence was expressed in the continuation of the tribunal. I mean, the tribunal was in existence for 15 years, had unlimited powers and indeed, not unlimited, but very significant powers and significant resources, over 300 million. Now, I don't think it's the case. I don't think people are suggesting, and I think it's wrong to say, from commentators or anybody, to say that every piece of criticism represented a campaign to collapse the tribunal. I think there was many criticisms, even in the Supreme Court and in the High Court, about certain aspects of the tribunal, which I think has to be accepted as well. I mean, within a democracy, you're going to have criticism from time to time.
But there was some pretty trenchant criticism, most notably from Willie O'Dea, who remains a member of your front bench, where he spoke about how...
But he also spoke about confidence in the tribunal and its capacity to do its work. I mean, he's on record as saying that.
Well, he was also quite sarcastic about the tribunal looking into Bertie Aherns' First Communion money and so on.
I accept that point, but I don't think that in itself can be legitimately construed as a campaign to collapse the tribunal. That's the point I'm making. I must say that it's a very serious criticism.
Do you agree with it, or do you accept the criticism, that specific criticism, or do you think it's unfair?
I certainly don't recollect any concerted action by anybody. I don't believe it, in the sense that, I was asked this question this morning. You know how your programme this morning would have put in a request for me to come on it. Likewise, at that time, a request to put into Government Information Service for ministers or people to come out and speak, and that's what happened on that occasion. I wasn't briefed to do a certain thing or anything like that.
Is the tribunal being a little precious on this?
If you look through all my commentary on it, I've always said, and let's be straight, that there was always attempts made to make a political football out of the work of the tribunal, and it must have been extremely difficult for the tribunal judges to operate in an atmosphere where comments were being made quite regularly by all sides. Even Fine Gael at one stage criticised the tribunal strongly. So I just want to make that point.
Fair point. But do you reject this specific criticism from the tribunal?
I don't reject it at all. I think obviously the judges made that because they were of that view. All I can say from my perspective, I certainly wasn't a part of any attempt to collapse the tribunal, good, bad or indifferent. I think my commentary was always very consistent in saying that we had to ultimately leave it to the judge and the tribunal to complete its work and make its findings. Okay,
I suppose just lastly, what is going to happen next in relation to Bertie Aherns and his membership of Fianna Fáil?
Well, the councillors concerned, Pádraig Finn and indeed Bertie Aherns, are being written to, and there will be a motion before the national executive of the party next Friday night, proposing their expulsion from the party. They will have an opportunity to respond, to make their case, and then the national executive will take its decision.
Well, they have responded already. Bertie Aherns.
Formally, in terms of the correspondence that will be sent, they can actually come before the meeting if they so wish.
Bertie Aherns' older brother Noel was making the point today on Newstalk Breakfast. He was urging you to stand back, not to do things in a hurry, to I suppose, digest the report. Is there a danger you'll be accused by supporters of Bertie Aherns of rushing this through to try and show your own credentials?
No, I said this morning, and I say it again to you, Shane, my only motivation here is to do what's right and in the best interest of restoring public trust in politics, and also reflecting and the views of the rank and file members of the party who are extremely upset and angry with what has happened. I do it based on the evidence that has been produced by the tribunal, no more, no less. These are findings of fact from the tribunal. I have to deal with that. I'm not in the business of questioning the tribunal which was established by the Oireachtas. I have no other motivation. I would much prefer not to be in a position where I have to recommend a motion of this kind. It's not an attempt to prove any credentials or anything like that. We're far beyond that sort of situation.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Fianna Fáil leader Micheal Martin, thanks for joining us on Newstalk Lunchtime this afternoon.